Welcome to the premiere episode of So VT Book Talk. I'm your host, Caren Simpson McVicker, and I'm joined this month by Jess Hunsicker, who is the events coordinator at Northshire Bookstore in Manchester, Vermont. Hi, Jess.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining me this month. We're excited to have you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting, Caren.
Yes, and I know you get the honor of introducing our very first author guest on the show, and why don't I let you take it away?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm very excited to introduce Vanessa Lyons. She is a professor at Bennington College and has written a brand new book called Lush Lives that we're here to talk about today. And you're also the author of two other stories. One is The Groves, an Audible original, and another story called Meet Me at Madrid. And I'm interested in hearing a little bit about those as well. But Lush Lives I'm particularly interested in because you have a background in art history and curation. And I know that this kind of takes place in that world, within the art world. So I'm curious, please, could you tell us a little bit about your new novel?
Well, it's great to be here in this first episode. Thanks for having me. So Lush Lives is a book about, in a nutshell, Glory, who's an artist who's based in LA, who inherits a Harlem brownstone from her great aunt, who she didn't know very well and didn't really like, actually, but then she gets this Harlem brownstone. She was born in Harlem but hasn't lived there since she was a child, so she goes back to Harlem, is faced with this house full of antiques and objects. Her aunt lived to be 101, so it really has the feeling of someone's whole life there, and she takes kind of a smattering of the estate's objects to an appraisal. And it's there she meets Parky de Groot, who is a very ambitious, slightly younger Connecticut resident or native from Greenwich. And, it's a love at first sight sort of situation that then ends up bringing them in and out of each other's lives, personally and professionally, as they kind of deal with a lot of the pressing, I think, questions for especially young women who are professionally ambitious. It's a little bit about that period where every decision seems like it might have implications for the whole rest of your life, and how to think ethically about these ins and outs of the professional world. So that's the setting for it, and romance ensues, and also other factors, but I won't give those away.
So what was the initial spark? What was the day you conceived this novel and thought, this is what I'm going to write next?
Well, I should have a good answer for that, but it was, it was conceived in COVID times, as so many novels were, and so what happened really is that I started writing almost immediately when that happened, because I was in rural Vermont where I live and teach, and as most of us did, we got locked down and suddenly converted to teaching online. And so I would teach online for hours, switch into different rooms in my house, and then write. And I didn't know what I wanted to write, but I started with a romance just because I was sad and really concerned about the state of the world, and I wanted to think about a different kind of world, and I wanted to write a world for queer and BIPOC women in particular, where the ending was happy, and romance ensures that. So I first wrote Meet Me in Madrid, then I wrote The Groves, which is a campus novel that is an Audible original with 7 different actors. It's really fun, but a very different kind of a book. And then I thought, I think I want to write something historical, but I don't want to write a historical novel. So as myself an historian, I'm an art historian, but I think a lot about the past, and I wanted to write something now that was still deeply engaged with another era, and particularly I wanted to write about the Harlem Renaissance. Not so much the first act of it, which is sort of the 20s and 30s, but the second act in the 40s, which is a little less known about. So I ended up having a situation where I was doing research and I was thinking about things that I teach that I wanted to think more about and write about. Nella Larson is one of those people, those authors. I've long been really intrigued by her writing. I have a lot of, sort of personal affinity with her. We have a very similar background. So, one thing sort of led to another. I had the 2 characters in mind, and then the setting in mind, and I was stuck in Vermont, but I had the opportunity to just think about Harlem and to think about creating a world on the page that felt accessible and possible, even if you couldn't physically be there, which I think for me, the idea of Harlem as, you know, it's certainly a cultural mecca, and it's a real place with real restaurants and the Schomburg Library and all these amazing sites, but it's also like a mental, it's a mental place of respite. It's a mental place to sort of dwell, I think, for a lot of people. So those are some of the sort of inciting incidents, I guess.
That's really amazing to hear, like, that this very much came out of a place that was, I think, well, for all of us, very difficult. COVID, it's so inspiring to hear stories of authors who have been able to create worlds that really were like a shining light in a very dark time for so many of us. So, yeah, it's wonderful.
Thank you. I hope that's true. It saved me in a way, and I think a lot of writers who wrote their way out of COVID have said that, you know, it was a way to survive. We were lucky, those of us who could do it.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious to hear more about your background as an art historian and your relationship with Harlem. So professionally, like, could you speak more to that?
Sure. I mean, I am an art historian, and I teach. Well, I was trained in Baroque art, and I'm really a Baroquist. So my specialty is 17th century Flemish and Spanish, and that's people like Rubens and Velázquez and Caravaggio. And so I really have no direct connection to the kind of art, which is contemporary art, that's in the book. But I, in my capacity as director of a visual arts lecture series at Bennington, where I teach, I invite contemporary artists to come and curators to come and give talks, and I've been doing that for 7 years, 10 or so a year. So I've met a lot of really exciting, and we've had, you know, a lot of people in sort of before they explode, which is a curatorial, you know, opportunity that's really exciting. So I've met a lot of artists, and I wanted to write about them, even though that's not the art history that I do per se, you know. But my own teaching is very, very broad and deep too, I hope, but it's not really connected to the book per se. And again, I mean, I'm a Coloradan. I am from a family that's been in Denver in the West for many generations on my mother's side, and Harlem was a new place for me when I moved to the East Coast. You know, I had always wanted to go there, but hadn't really, even on New York trips, been there. And I started going there when I moved out here. But I don't, you know, that's kind of what the book is about. Glory's from Denver, imagine, and she grew up, you know, as I did, in a sort of a lot of majority white spaces, and she feels like she's not coming home because she didn't really get to know Harlem. And I wanted to write a character who had that sort of like disconnect, you know, a feeling of coming home but not knowing what you're coming home to and needing to get to know it all again. And I felt like because Harlem's not my home, that I could write out of that feeling of getting to know it now, but it not being my, you know, where I grew up by any stretch.
Oh, yeah. Well, fascinating. I always love to hear about how close, or some other times how far, an author is from the work that they're putting out. So thank you for sharing.
Yes.
It's it's fiction, you know. It's like, I think there's a lot of talking these days about what you're allowed to write, you know, and I take those conversations really seriously, but also I think part of what's exciting and magical almost about Harlem is that it does hold that place, and I felt like I needed to study it. And I've taught it for a while, and I've thought about its literature, but I felt like I'm going to write about it, even though it's not my, you know, it's not a place that I can say I grew up in. But I think that's partly what books do, is they let writers too, you know, project ourselves into other spaces and imagine other possibilities so that readers can maybe do the same thing.
Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, and congratulations.
Thank you.
It's
Thanks
really,
so much for having me.
Yes, we're so excited to have you here. So one of the sort of segments we're going to do every month is we're going to talk a little bit about the last book we read, the book we're reading now, and sort of what's next on our TBR pile. So if you don't mind, we'd like to press you into service to maybe share with us what your last, now, and next are.
Well, I'm guessing maybe it's like this for you guys too. I have many stacks in many places of my house. In my house, I have the audiobook mental stack or digital stack. So I'm always reading many books at the same time. But I guess I'm thinking one of the last books that really stuck with me that I read is Mrs. S. Though I just read Death in Venice on a very different note, which I had never read. And so the next one is Current.
Yeah.
Current is, I'm reading, Margot Duahi's fantastic Scorched Grace, which is a part of the Sister Halliday Mysteries detective series, and that's great. Manywhere, whose author's name is escaping me, I have to say, but that's just a book of short stories. And then what's the next one? The next thing I'm going to read?
We all have a TBR pile
right,
this high. What do you think you might pull off of it next?
Well, I'm going to pick something that is not in the fiction pile because the fiction pile is tall, and that is the new catalog for the Manet Degas exhibition, which is opening, I think, today or in the next few days at the Met, and that is pretty significant because, among other things, Manet's Olympia is coming from the Musée d'Orsay to New York, which it's only traveled a few times. So I'm excited to read. Denise Murrell especially has an essay in there I'm excited to read.
Oh, that's great.
Those are mine, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah,
that's great. And Jess, what have you been reading?
Yes, so I just recently read, this is a collection of poems by Aria D. Matthews. It's called Bread and Circus. And the author, she's actually a Yale Younger Poets Award winner, and she's also Philadelphia's Poet Laureate. And this entire collection is all very much about, it's autobiographical. So it's about her life, and it deals with issues like class and race, and particularly economics, and also gender as well. And she talks very much about her experience growing up Black and being a woman, and she talks about her being a mother, and so it's very comprehensive, and she just writes so beautifully, and I found it really engaging. I don't read an awful lot of poetry, so this was kind of like dipping my toes into somewhere I'm not particularly familiar with, and I really loved it. And then right now I'm actually reading just something to prepare myself for spooky season. And it's nonfiction. It's called The Vermont Book of the Dead. Oh. It's by Roxy Zwicker. It's all about different graveyards throughout the state of Vermont. And so I kind of have like my list. I'm making a roadmap to visit them all. And I'm pretty excited to do that. So this is nice. It's nice to just kind of pick up and skim through.
Are you going to go in the daytime or the nighttime?
I know. Well, now I don't know. Because it would be kind of, I think, cool to see them at night, but I might be a little too scared. And this is something I'm really excited about, and I wonder if it's something you might be interested in as well, but it's called One Woman Show by Christine Coulson. And we actually are supposed to be having her come in November to Northshire to do an event. So this book is written by Christine, and she is also from the museum world and from the art world, and she was very inspired by like art tags, like the little plaques. And she found like the language that they would use very interesting, and she was wondering like, well, what if we used that type of very like formatted, strict language to talk about people and to talk about characters. And so this book very much does that, apparently.
Interesting.
So it sounds like it's constructed in a very unique way, and it's supposed to be about this woman, but she's talked about as though she's a piece of artwork. So it very much discusses things like empowerment and your place in society and your mobility or lack of mobility as a woman. And so I'm very excited to dive into that.
Sounds good.
Sounds really interesting. Well, my last book was Even As We Breathe, and this is by Annette Sonuk-Clapsaddle. And so she is a member of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation in North Carolina. And as a historical fiction writer, I'm always drawn to people who write historical fiction, where they find sort of an interesting, real piece of history and use it as a setting for another story. And so what drew me to this novel is this is set in 1942 in the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, which is where they held the diplomats and their families when the war broke out. They sort of interned all of the German and Japanese diplomats and their families who were in the United States at this inn. And she uses that setting to craft just a really beautiful and almost heartbreaking coming-of-age story for this young Cherokee man. He's 19, and he's trying to figure out he can't go to war because he has an injury. And so he goes to work at the inn, and it deals with sort of a lot of the tribal issues and what life was like on the reservation then, because this would be pre-tourism, really, before they had finished the highway that connected all of the Smoky Mountains. So there's a lot of history there, but it's also just this really touching story about this young man. And I was saying earlier, it was a very atmospheric novel because it's the Smoky Mountains, and then there was actually a fire that was happening on the reservation, so things actually were smoky, and I feel like it did create like this veil, like what was over this young man, County, as he was trying to kind of find his way and couldn't really see his way. So I really enjoyed it. So this just came out in paperback this spring, I think. And right now, I'm in the middle, I'm halfway through. I have some questions for you by Rebecca Mackay. This was the book club pick for a book club that I'm in Dorset. And I thank you for bringing me a hard copy, because I am reading it on an e-reader, and now I know why I'm only halfway through. And this is a fascinating book. It's been recommended by so many people. It's a departure for me in that it's contemporary. It's more of a mystery, thriller, sort of unsolved mystery. But it's fascinating. It's about a woman who returns to her high school boarding school to teach kind of a mini course in the winter, but really coming back is so kind of just drags so much up for her, because when she was there her senior year, her roommate was murdered, and someone is in jail for that murder, but she's never really believed it was the right person. So this book is an incredible example of deep POV, because you are in Bodie Kane's head. You are way in her head, like the whole book. And sometimes you just go pages and there's not a conversation with another living person. And I'm really fascinated at how the author is peeling the onion. Like for me, just kind of looking at it structurally, like what does she decide? What are we gonna learn now? And what flashbacks? And so just seeing how it's all unraveling. So I'm definitely gonna finish it before my book group in October.
You can do it.
I know I can do it. Now that I'm kind of impressed that I'm 50% through now. So that's what I'm reading now. And next, I went to see TJ Klune when he came, and he was at Southern Vermont Art Center when Northshire brought him in, and I absolutely loved The House on the Cerulean Sea. So his next book, which is Under the Whispering Door, and I know he has another book out now too, In the Lives of Puppets, but this is next. This has been sitting in my bedroom. I have been looking at it since he came to speak, and I think it's time. I'm ready for his wonderful world building and tenderheartedness. So this is definitely what's up next for me. So thank you so much, Vanessa, for coming. We loved having you as our first guest. We're really excited to get this show kicked off, and we wish you all the best with Lush Lives.
Thank you.
Do you have any events coming up in October that we can?
Let's see. I mean, I'll be at Northshire shortly, and then in October, I have to say, I'm really excited to be at Ripped Bodice LA for a conversation with Roxane Gay, who's my editor and publisher. So we will be speaking about the book in person, and I'm very delighted that's going to happen.
Great.
And I haven't been to the Ripped Bodice Brooklyn yet, but
Yeah, the brand new one.
the brand new one, and I'm hoping that we'll make a stop there sometime in the new year.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy your time in LA.
Thank you.
And thank you for spending some time with us.
It was very fun. Thanks, you guys.
And now we're so excited to be joined by Paige Vingola, who's the Assistant Director of the Manchester Community Library. Hi, Paige.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, we're having so much fun. So I heard you wanted to participate in our Last Now Next segment as well, and tell us what you've been reading.
So it's a very difficult question to answer, so I'm going to limit myself a bit. I too tend to read multiple things all at the same time to have a little bit of variety. But I think the most impactful book that I just finished reading was Demon Copperhead. And that was a gut punch, I think, from page 1 through to the very last, but it was enjoyable is the wrong way to say that, but I think it was an important book to read. I think it gave a vantage point to a part of America that a lot of people don't see, sort of just drive past and try to ignore. And I think that it, for that reason, I'm glad that I stuck it out, even if I wanted to keep putting it down repeatedly. It's written beautifully. It's just very hard to watch the train wreck that is the variety of characters present in the book. My current, I'm going to go perhaps a little bit out on a limb, and my current, I'm going to go with an audiobook. I am listening to Stephen Fry read Mythos. This is probably my 3rd or 4th time through Mythos, but this is the first time I've ever listened to it, and I am in love with the way Stephen Fry tells his own stories. So I highly recommend that. That one is an Audible, which is fabulous for when I'm in the car and I don't have enough time to read, because you can't read and drive. They tend to frown on that. So I've been listening to Mythos in the car predominantly. My next book, I'm going to read Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I'm very much looking forward to it. I had picked it up earlier in the summer and I wasn't able to get into it, so I put it down. I'm fully invested now in making that my next book. It's actually the book that the Vermont Humanities Council selected for this year's Vermont Reads book. So the library, we're setting up a bunch of different programs throughout the year in addition to an art exhibition. That's all going to be in support of that book. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving in and giving it new feet.
Awesome. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that there are going to be a bunch of things
Oh,
around
absolutely.
that read. That's great. So let's go back to the audiobook, because something that's showing up right now on a lot of podcasts and bloggers, a lot of people are talking about, do you say you read a book if you listen to the audio? Or is it just a different experience of consuming it? Is it a different form of entertainment or instruction when you listen to something versus reading it? And I know you've done a lot of work in education. I would just love to get your take on that.
If I'm going to be pedantic, I'm going to say don't use the word read when you're listening to a book, because reading implies taking something in through the eyes, whether it be reading a room, reading a picture, reading or reading a book. But I think that there tends to be sort of a negative implication when people say, oh, well, you didn't read that, you listened to it. And I really don't understand why. That it makes no sense to me that that should be somehow denigrated. Well, first of all, people process information differently. Some people are visual processors, some people are audio processors. And to say that somebody who processes in an auditory fashion is doing less than somebody who reads, that doesn't make any sense to me. Particularly if you think about the science behind it. When you read with your eyes, that's predominantly a left brain activity. When you have to use your ears in order to be able to kind of work through an understanding of language, that's bilateral. You're using both sides of your brain. So in fact, you're kind of doing more work if you're listening to the book. I used to use audiobooks frequently in my classrooms when I was teaching, because I would give students the opportunity to read or to listen if it was available. Here's the timestamp for when this chapter begins and when that chapter ends, and some people do much better listening while reading along. So I don't understand why there is this, I don't know, perhaps it's this weird need that people have to specify the difference between, well, you didn't read it, you listened to it. Having said that, Stephen Fry is fantastic, right? And so being able to listen to his voice, or his voice use the words that he had written on paper, or I love listening to Neil Gaiman when he reads his own work, right? So I think that that's a whole other level of performance that you don't necessarily get just visually. And having said that, I'm a visual processor, so I prefer to read a book than I do to listen to it typically.
I think it's just a completely different experience for me. So I just listened to Meryl Streep, read Ann Patchett's Tom Lake, and for me, it was just a joy. And I was actually listening to it. I was out in my garden and I was harvesting it in the book. They're like harvesting the cherries. So it was just like such a different experience where I can't read and work on my garden at the same time. And I absolutely, I loved it, but it was a different experience and we talked about this earlier, when I read a book, I'm making the pictures, I'm making the decisions. And when I listen to a book, I do feel like you're directed by the person's voice and their intonations. And I don't mind that. It's just a different experience and a different way to consume the literature. And also, when parents read to their children, we certainly encourage that. Sometimes I think I read to my children too much.
No such thing. No such thing. But it's a great
collection
point,
of books, but it is true.
And it's an important point, though, because children having people read to them, that's how they learn language and language structure. So to say that an adult is not learning language or is it's not contributing to literacy in some way because they're not reading it with their eyes, that's not true. You learn a language both auditorily and visually. So I think that it's a different experience.
It's a different experience. You want to chime in, Jess?
Well, yeah, I completely agree with both of you. It's a different experience, but neither is lesser than the other, certainly.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, why don't you fill us in on what's going on at the Manchester Community Library?
Oh boy, okay, so there's a lot going on in the month of October at the library. I'll have to kind of pick and choose a little bit. There are a couple of things that I'm very excited about, so I definitely want people to know. We have, for the first time, it's going to be starting the first Monday of October, so that is, let me check my notes, that's going to be October 2nd, and it's going to be from 5 to 6 p.m. I have a teacher who is coming in order to be able to do a beginner's class in American Sign Language. So this is, if you have no experience, you have a little experience, it does not matter. She is running a 4 consecutive week course in order to be able to just kind of test the waters and see what the interest level is in the community for an American Sign Language class. Now, the teacher, her name is Patricia Mades, and she is a professional interpreter as well. She has taught ASL in college classrooms and high school classrooms, and she does professional translation, I don't know if that's the right term, for American Sign Language for television and for other events. So very excited about that. Mondays from 5 to 6 p.m. Another new event that I'm excited to make sure people know about, we are working with the Collaborative and their RTU program, so that's Resilience Through Understanding, and we have an individual who's leading a book group that's going to be roughly every other Tuesday, but it doesn't fall out exactly that way. We have the schedule of days and times at the library. But the book is called This Naked Mind. It's by Annie Grace, and it is about basically the science behind alcohol dependency, right? So it's the idea that there are different factors that influence the choices that people make when they choose to drink, whether that is in the form of alcoholism or just, say, social drinking, right? But why do you choose to go for the beer rather than something non-alcoholic? These kinds of things are part of what's going to be in this discussion. So this is for any we'll say high school age and up, interested individual who wants to support the Collaborative and support the RTU program in the form of a book group. So that's going to be starting on, that is October 3rd, which is 5:30 to 6:30. That's going to be Tuesdays. Also, we are working on having daily after-school programming for kids, say, upper elementary and middle school. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, we're starting a new program. It's called the Creativity Cave, and it's going to be on Wednesdays after school. And this is an art-based program, right? So we will have local artists of all different types, whether they be maybe fiber artists or painters or graphic designers or potters, all different local professional artists come in order to be able to lead workshops for kids after school so that they have a way of being able to get out of class. You want to be able to express yourself. Maybe talking is not the way you can best express yourself, and it's important to be able to have an outlet for communication, particularly for, I think, the preteens and tweens, right? So that's we're kind of focused on that one.
Okay.
But I don't want to leave GNAT without talking about GNAT's special workshop that they are starting at the library, which is super exciting. So that's going to be October 10th at 5:30 to 6:30, and this is going to have a couple of GNAT professionals coming in order to be able to talk about like storytelling and citizen journalism, right? So we'll have the elements of a narrative in terms of video.
Fantastic. Wow.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So if you want to know more, you got to check out our website. We got a lot.
Definitely. Well, some of those sound really exciting, and I'm pretty interested in a couple of them.
Yeah,
So
me too.
that's great. So real quick, Jess, take us through what's happening in Northshire.
Oh yeah, I'll just touch on a couple of the events that we've got coming up in October toward the beginning of the month. We're going to have Doug Lyons come. He's a local fly fisherman, and he wrote this book called Fly Fishing on the Batten Kill. And he's actually going to come and do a fly tying demonstration for us all, and he's going to be signing some books. So we're excited for that. I've never had a fly tire, I guess, so I can't wait to learn.
You'll learn a
something
new skill for sure.
Absolutely. And then on October 15th, we're having a Dragons Love Tacos party at the bookstore, where we will have a taco truck popped up outside for people to get some lunch. There's going to be a story time. We're going to have a scavenger hunt.
Aww.
There's going to be some crafts. And of course, we're going to have Dragons Love Tacos, which is, there's a brand new book coming out soon that's, I believe it's called Dragon's First Taco, and it's a board book. So there's, a new age group that's getting indoctrinated into the canon of Dragons Love Tacos, which is very exciting and adorable, I think. And then on October 21st, we're having Daniel Mason come, and he's going to be talking about his book North Woods, which is one that is very beloved by the booksellers of Northshire. We're very excited for him to come. It's a story that it's all about New England. It takes place in the Northwoods of Massachusetts, and the central kind of focus of the story, the main character, if you will, is this home. And the book kind of just follows it over the centuries as there are different inhabitants. So we're very, very excited for that.
Excellent. Well, oh my
fascinating.
gosh, this is so much to take in, and I think it's probably time for us to wrap up. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us for our very first episode of SoVT Book Talk, and we hope to see you next month. Until then, happy reading.